My name is Steve Gilman, and for decades I've been helping brands engage with their audiences. On this podcast, we'll connect the dots in the fast-paced world of branding by talking with entrepreneurs, leaders, and marketers on the front lines of telling brand stories. On today's episode of Brand Story, we talk with visual storytelling professor Scott Witthaus about why brands need to have a healthy skeptic in the room, the worst thing that can happen in the edit booth, and the biggest mistakes storytellers make, plus many more insights from his incredible career. Welcome to Brand Story. My name is Steve Gilman. I am your host for this episode, and our guest today is Scott Witthaus. Scott has been in film and video industry for, over 35 years. It's been a while, and you've worked in all facets. You've worked in production, post, live television, editorial for agencies. You've been in management, so you've done it all. And then Scott's currently a managing partner at Low Country Creative and a professor of visual storytelling at the VCU Brandcenter in Richmond, Virginia.
That's correct.
Hi, Scott.
Nothing to correct there. Everything was right on the money.
That's good. I don't want to get anything wrong because I know I'll pay for it later.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Full disclosure, Scott and I have been in the same fantasy football league for an eternity, and I have never beaten him.
That is correct. If I could remember the name of that Baltimore tight end, I'd bring it up now, but I just can't.
Right. Yeah. The point 2 points or whatever that was.
With you at the game.
With me at the game, just crying. Yeah. So secretly, I despise Scott. So this will be a very difficult interview. So Scott, today we're going to talk mostly about visual storytelling because you're a professor of visual storytelling, which is hard to say. It's like a tongue twister.
It is. It really is. Every year.
Yeah. Professor of visual storytelling. I think I can say that.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about that a little bit. And you started working at VCU as a professor in 2008. That's
correct. Yeah, I was recruited. I think I went full-time in 2008. I'd come back from Washington running Henniger Media Services, their operations for them, which was a large media company that did documentary type work for Discovery Channel, National Geographic, Learning Channel, a totally different animal from the commercial world. My first day in Washington, D.C. was 9/11. 2001. So I kind of called the wife and said, don't sell the house quite yet. I came back and I started a company called Gray Box with Kristen O'Connor from Rainmaker Studios and Kirk Schroeder, who's an entertainment attorney. And then I got a call from VCU saying, somebody gave us your name. Would you mind doing adjunct a couple of classes? So I did that. And then a position came open and they recruited me to apply for it, and I did, and I got the job. And it was totally new to me. If you would have told me 15 years ago I would be a college professor, I would have said, you're kidding me. I'm an editor. That's what I do. But the nice thing about the Brandcenter is the director at the time, Rick Boyko, one of my things for going to academia was I had to keep working. I had to keep editing because I love doing that. And his answer to that was, we want you to keep editing because you can bring stuff from the real world back into the classroom to your teaching. And once I heard that, I was like, okay, let's give it a shot. It's the #1 graduate school for branding in the country, and they're asking you to join. And they're saying, yes, please keep working too. I'm like, okay. So I gave that a shot.
So you've been there a good long time now.
Yeah. It's been a really interesting experience. Like I said, I've learned how to teach. In fact, while I was starting at the Brandcenter, as we were professional faculty, not an academic faculty, I went back and got my master's from Virginia Tech, Master of the Arts in Education and Instructional Technology. And it really helped me understand what a curriculum should do and how you should set up a class and meeting professional goals out in the real world. That's what I try to do, is I identify professional needs and then tailor my curriculum to make sure my students, when they get out there, can meet those professional needs.
Yeah, well, I would think teaching visual storytelling and using the technology, so much has changed. I mean, it changes year to year. It changes almost day to day. So
I can show you my brand new 4K camera.
Yeah, right.
I just got, right, and so for $1,500, I've got a 4K camera that with Filmic Pro on. So the technology, everything from the editing software, which has come down in price tremendously, to the camera, to what we're shooting and what we're shooting for. Early on, it was okay, this is going to be aired as a broadcast commercial. Now the avenues are, I'm a little jealous of the young folks getting into the industry now, because they're not trapped in the 60 or 30-second box anymore.
Right.
Their stories can live on the web, and can be long form, branded entertainment type thing. So it really is a new world out there, and I love it. I mean, a lot of folks my age, your age,
Yep.
Sometimes are threatened by the fact that now everyone can do it.
Yeah.
They've got their 4K camera in their pocket, and everyone can do it. And my answer is always, well, just do it better. It's really no big secret. If you just do it better, you'll stay in business.
If you're good at what you do and you're not threatened by new and change, you're going to be just fine. Like, I love the new world of content. That 30, 60-second box, even though sometimes it's a useful tool and sometimes that's what we're working on, like, I love the iteration and the content and the new tech and all the stuff.
Absolutely. I mean, I just love the fact that the story can live on in a longer format. I remember the first time it kind of came to me, I was doing some branded content for Triumph Boats for a company out of Durham, North Carolina. And it was the first time a client ever said to me, this is web, this is viral. Oh, by the way, we'll do a couple 30-second spots as well. And that was kind of the throwaway.
Right, yeah.
Whereas before, it's like, we're going to take our commercial and put it on the web. Now we're going to do the web thing, and we'll cut a couple commercials at some point. And that was like, okay, this is happening, and this is a good thing.
This is real. I'm going to embrace it. Have you seen a lot of people that are a little more old school editors or producers struggle with all the change?
Way back in the day when I was running post houses, and then actually when I was freelance, had to hire out post houses, it was kind of a game of whoever has the biggest checkbook can play.
Yep.
Right. So, because like up at Henniger in the Arlington office where I was headquartered when I was running operations for the company, they had 14 online suites, which could run from $750,000 to $1 million each. So you needed to have big pockets. You needed to have, the banking connections to actually be in the game. Maybe you weren't the most creative, but you had the biggest wallet. And then, when Avid came out, and then Final Cut especially came out, that scared a lot of people. And quite honestly, we had to take Henniger through a voluntary Chapter 11, because it was right at that tipping point where Avid Media Composer was there and the output was acceptable for broadcast. Suddenly the clients are going, I could do this in my office. And we had 14 suites at $1 million a pop with leases on them. So the economic dynamics changed right there. It was amazing to watch, scary to watch, because when I was up there, I had Discovery Channel clients in my edit suites in Arlington recruiting my editors to come work at Discovery Channel. So it was like, boy, this is a new world.
Yeah, it was a huge paradigm shift, and with Apple getting into editing and Final Cut Pro, and I lived through all this too, kind of with you, in that I brought clients and we edited with the U.S. Postal Service at Henniger on Grass Valley Suites. I worked with you in Avid Suites at Graybox. Then the advent of Apple editing and all the other programs and everything. And honestly, like, I've enjoyed every bit of it, because we've always been pretty scrappy.
Yeah. And the beautiful thing is, it's so democratized now. And again, if you're scared of that democratization, maybe you should find another place, that you can buy your way. I don't know. I'm kind of making that up. But I love the idea that, you can take that iPhone 12, and I've got this little gimbal mount that I'm going to use for all my B-roll. I'm still doing production work, but all the B-roll is going to be off the iPhone. With the little software you can put on the iPhone and a stabilizing mount, why not? And now, the funny thing is now we're seeing kind of this introduction that vertical video is okay, instead of shooting landscape. And that used to be, when I'd see that in class, well, that's not really, you should really shoot in landscape all the time because that's what a 35 millimeter film ratio is, and blah, 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 blah. But now it's not like that. Filmmakers are using phones and doing, full kind of cinema in the vertical mode. And of course, TikTok and, and the social networks have really made that more acceptable. And I see that becoming more and more involved, integrated into, standard storytelling, and it's okay. It's right. It's not wrong.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like how language changes, how people, if you're, older, you'll be like, oh, you shouldn't use that slang. That's not a real word. It's the same thing,
Right. Yeah,
processes
absolutely.
change, technology changes. And one of the things I've found is what clients need is they need someone that knows how to tell a story and use the technology, because a lot of times, some people can go out and get really nice looking footage on a 4K phone or use a DSLR rig, and we use it all, everything from GoPros to DSLR rigs to anything that works. And so what do you think's had the most impact for you on your perspective as a visual storyteller over the years?
Well, the technology, I really don't. That doesn't, like I tell my students, I can teach you how to push the buttons, and you can edit something, right? You can edit something. I don't care if you're using Premiere or Final Cut Pro or Final Cut Pro 10 or Avid Media Composer or whatever. I tell my students, I said, most of the commercials we see on the air, you can cut in iMovie. Quite honestly, you could.
Sure.
It's usually like 7 cuts, end card, boom. Okay, here you go. Go ahead. I would say it's that democratization of the ability to tell a story visually, and then the distribution of it, and the immediacy of the distribution as well. The idea that you can shoot something and it's to your client or out there telling a story within minutes, really, if you want, is amazing. And quite honestly, Steve, there's a good and a bad to that. And I tell my students, I say a lot of times when you're in the creative mode and you're in that zone, you get to a point where your eyes are tired, your brain's tired, and you should put it away and go away, right? So, but back in our day, we had that built in because we had to be done by 5 o'clock because FedEx came at 6. We had to make a VHS, get it to FedEx. The client wouldn't get it till at least 9:30 the next morning, so we'd get back in the suite around 11, talk to the client on the phone, and it allowed us that time to let things settle and percolate, and we'd come back in, hey, it still looks good, or no, it doesn't look good. The storytellers today, especially in the commercial world, don't have that luxury anymore. It is immediate. It is immediate. It's like I'm editing a documentary on Jeff Goodby. It's part of an inspiration series, and my client, who is my former director at the Brandcenter, he was on Zoom with me the whole time, and I just sharing my Final Cut screen, and we're editing that way. So, the beauty of the immediacy of it, the ability for the technology to eliminate geography from the creative process, as geography is no longer a problem, and especially in this last 13, 14 months. I haven't been in a real edit suite in over a year. It's been sitting right here, in my little office with my little, Rode microphone and just working with clients that way.
Yeah, isn't it great? I mean, we've been in Harrisonburg in the Shenandoah Valley for so many years. I mean, this is our 27th year in business, and we've been in the Valley. We were in DC for the first 6, 7 years. And when we moved here, people thought, oh man, that's going to be so bad for you. So I feel like we've been a little bit ahead of that curve because we have clients all over the Eastern Seaboard, down North Carolina, different places. And so we've been trying to work this way and working this way successfully for years. And so it's been great.
Yeah, I mean, I think you guys were forced to find those solutions that eliminate geography and storytelling, and that's great, and who would have thought Zoom was going to do what it was going to do 15 months ago, and suddenly, it's changing everything. And I think the post industry, especially, now production, I still believe in the value of people getting together and being creative together. I don't think that happens in Zoom. You know, little rectangles talking to each other. A lot of times you lose that, and I know I see it in my students. I see the fatigue of looking at the screen all day. But as far as post goes, you know, again, my client yesterday, he's up in Connecticut. I'm here, and we're editing, and you know, I put up you know, a cut on Dropbox so he can make some notes, and it just seems normal, and I love it. You know, I think it's a really a great way to do things.
Yeah, we love it. We use different systems. We have a system we use where our editors will post an edit, and we can go in and just mark it up and look at things. And you know, we're all in different. Even though we're in the same area, we're all in different spots now.
Right.
So just the future of how we do this, I feel like, is wide open right now, and it's really fun. So I have a question about, you've worked with so many different brands, like throughout your career, and not naming any names or anything, but you know, still to this day, what do you think are the common visual storytelling and mistakes that brands make?
That one is pretty easy, Steve, because I teach that to my students all the time. You know, I see, you know, quite honestly, I look at it in the Super Bowl ads a lot.
Yeah.
And I see visual execution before concept and story. And you know, and I try to tell my students, they will come to me with an idea, and I say, I'll tell them, what's the concept? And they say, well, the concept's about these two people walking down the street, and it's going to be in black and white, and it's going to be snowing. I said, no, that's the execution. What's the concept? Well, they're walking down the street, and it's snow. No. What, you know? And then we start dissecting. I said, what problem are you solving? And then we can get to a concept from that idea of problem solving. You know, and that is the biggest, you know, that is the biggest error I see all the time. You know, I actually have and quite honestly, also, I see a lot of things go out on the air, and, you know, I'm not even going to count what's on the web because that's a bit of the Wild West, but I see a lot of things go out on the air, and my wife and I will look at each other and go, who approved that? And, you know, and I've actually got an entire class I do now called the Healthy Skeptic. Where, you know, in the ad industry, especially, you know, a lot of the agencies have been bought up and they're all part of conglomerates. And I found a post on LinkedIn by a gentleman named Derek Walker about the lack of the healthy skeptic in the room anymore. And that's how stuff gets out, you know, because no one's willing to raise their hand and say, you know, should we really do that? You know, should we really do that? And it came crystal clear to me about 4 years ago watching the Super Bowl. And there was a Dodge truck spot that used part of a sermon from Dr. Martin Luther King.
Yeah, I remember that.
So, remember that one?
Yep.
So I looked at my wife, Pamela, and I said, you know, that doesn't feel right. I'd love to have been in that room. Well, then I kept that spot, and then I started digging a little deeper into that sermon. And you can find it on the air. There's some people who have been very clever. They found the rest of the sermon and put it to the visuals. And it was about the evils of materialism. You know, and talked about advertising people are very good at their jobs to make you want to buy that car or buy, you know. So that commercial and then finding that other part of the sermon started me looking at other things of like, how did this get out there? And I'm trying to teach my students to be the healthy skeptic in the room and raise their hand and say, let's think about this. You know, maybe there wouldn't have been a Pepsi moment years ago with one of the Kardashians, I think. And there's so many things you see on the air. And as I started digging into things, I kept finding more and more and more. And it's like, where was the healthy skeptic? And you know, these big conglomerates have kind of pushed that down. If you disagree, you are not a team player. You know, that's kind of, and you know, and I tell my students, if you raise your hand and you feel, you know, you've made a good point and it's a point that's true to your moral compass and they fire you for it, you shake their hands and say, thank you very much. This, you know, I'll be on my way now, because that's not where you want to be, right?
Yeah, I think with the democratization of tools, and you think about what value you have to offer, whether you're an experienced editor or you're a producer or director like me, it's being the healthy skeptic and giving good advice.
Right.
Because
right.
sometimes, even if the concept is right, you know, you can execute a story 10 different ways.
That's correct.
And so what elements do you think are actually crucial for a successful story?
Well, if you're talking like a brand story, So if you're talking about a brand story, again, I go back to embracing the problem that's being solved. I use, one of the first assignments I give my students, and my students usually, I teach about 40 to 50 a semester, and probably about 15 of them have had experience, and then there's probably another 20 that are scared out of their minds about the camera and the editing, and I give the first assignment, I give them Purell hand sanitizer. I said, okay, and this year I didn't, because basically Purell saved the world. So
Yeah, right.
I get the same concept. We save the world. Well, that's a pretty good problem to solve. But I tell them, I say, here's your first project. I say, come up with a concept, and then talk to me about the visual execution. And they have to learn how to do storyboards and scripting, and they have to do classes in Final Cut Pro editing, just because it's the easiest to learn. And so many times they come back with, it kills 99.99% of germs, and it's got aloe vera in it, and your skin smells good. I said, okay, great, okay. So I said, let's take a field trip to CVS and let's look at all the knockoffs. What do they say on kills 99.99% of germs, aloe vera, and makes your skin smell good? Okay, so we can't fight on that. We're not the cheapest. We're the brand. We're the Kleenex of that skin sanitizer stuff. So what do? And I try to let them say, think, I want, let's look about a problem. What's the problem that this brand solves? Well, problem one could be kids bring germs to school all the time. I'm a parent. I care about my kids' education. Therefore, Purell, they have a travel size. I give to my kid. He can wipe his hands after he touches anything. Purell becomes less of a hand sanitizer and more of an education brand, right? And then you get to by the way, we kill 99.99% of germs, and we have about aloe vera, and his skin smells good and all that. So I really try to get them to, embrace the problem, figure it out, and like you guys do a lot of strategic work and strategic thinking. Who are these people and I show them, there's a good TED talk by Simon Sinek called Sell the Why. And I think I show that to them every year, every semester, and it's really getting old because it's 4x3. It looks like it was shot on a VHS.
I've watched that. It's a great one.
Yeah. So, but it's like you're not selling the product; you're selling the solution to a problem.
Yeah.
The product will sell itself if you can identify that and set it up properly.
Yeah, and I think my background in directing theater, like one of the tools that I use over and over again, is finding the emotion. Like in theater, they call it find the love. And honestly, like solving a problem, but finding the why, but finding the emotional why.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
What is it about this that can make someone feel one of their more basic needs being met or emotions being triggered? And I think that's really powerful, because I see a lot of advertising that forgot the emotion.
Yep. Yeah, no, you're right. And that's an unspoken thing, and again, you go back to that Cynic video. I mean, he talks about that part of the brain where it has no ability to verbalize, or it has, but it's that gut feel, it's that emotion. It's like, okay, this is why I want to act a certain way or buy a certain product, or act a way to buy the product, that connected with me, so if I want my kid to stay in school, and here's Purell saying, we care about your child's education. That's why we, suddenly it's not about the 99.99%, when that's a good place to be if you're a brand, It
is. Yeah. Making an emotional connection with your consumer and also solving their problem at the same time is where you want to be. So what do you think the hardest part of a visual storyteller's job is today?
The biggest challenge is, I think a lot of people make the technology a big challenge, and it doesn't need to be, and I throw that out because, again, the iPhone with 4K video and whatever you want to do. Again, I think it's that the thought process of telling a story, and I see a lot of students, I mentioned before, run to a visual execution. Just run, and not think about the story. How does this work? What is this character like? What is the background of this character? So if we're not talking about brands here, I give a semester-long assignment where I said to the students, you have 3 to 5 minutes of blank space. Make something, and that is the hardest assignment they have. That is, and the way I look at it for them, and I tell them this, I said, working on a brand is like kind of like bowling with the gutter guards down, when you're kids, and the brand itself will keep you kind of in the lane. But when it's a blank screen, the gutter guards are off, and you can throw gutter balls all day long if you're not, telling that story correctly, developing characters, thinking about, how are you going to shoot this? How are you going to edit it? Shooting to edit, but it really comes back to that story, making sure you're thinking conceptually first, and then the execution will make itself apparent.
You said something about shooting to edit. And I've found that that's, especially in aspiring visual storytellers or on the client side, they'll see what they want, but it's the movie in their head, not how it can actually happen. And then I've seen things get executed where it's uneditable.
Yep. Agreed.
So can you tell me a little bit about what you would tell people about shooting to edit?
Well, I think we both, I've worked for directors who have never been editors, and the best directors I've worked for have edited at some point. They know that shit rolls downhill.
Yeah, it sure does.
And the edit suite is at the bottom of the hill. So if it's shit at the top of the hill, it's going to be really hard to make, or chicken shit at the top of the hill. It's hard to make chicken salad at the bottom. So, shooting to edit is so important. And, you can do storyboards and things like that, but, it's a skill. And, it's a skill people learn. And they learn it usually by sitting in an edit suite, feeling that heat coming up your neck going, oh my God, this is not going to work. I'm just going to have to put like a 2-second dissolve in here. And that'll fix it.
How can I cover this? Yeah.
Yeah. And then the client's going to go crazy and, we'll just put some text on the screen, we didn't shoot it. You didn't get it, So with my teaching hat on, I try to tell the students, I said, do a storyboard, do a shoot board, shoot the board, but always get other things. If you're in a scene where you have two people sitting there, one's writing something and one's drinking a cup of coffee, after you get that scene shot, go get the close-up of that person writing. Go get the close-up of that coffee coming to the person's mouth, because you never know. You never know. You may need that editorial break, when you get downhill to make the chicken salad. So yeah, I mean, it's amazing over my career doing this when, the best parts are when I was actually invited on the set, so they bring the editor on the set where the director and I knew each other well enough where I could stop him and say, hey, while you're here, can you get that close up over there just in case? And that's really good. The second best is having a director who has been an editor before or still is an editor. That's a double-edged sword, because suddenly the director has his cut or her cut, and I'm working with the client. It's like, oh boy. But yeah, I've been in way too many situations where it's not shot, it's not in the can, it's not on disc, it's not on film back in the day, and there's not a lot you can do, and it's so important to remember that you're shooting for the edit. And I'm selfish, I'm an editor, but that's, make me happy.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, because we've all of us that are in this business have been in that moment where we don't have it.
Right.
And we've got to try to figure it out. And I think one of the downsides about the democratization of the technology is the lack of education around shooting for the edit. Or conversely, the amount of time you actually need to shoot for the edit. Because when someone pictures like, oh, well, it's just going to be a shot of this guy doing this thing. Well, it is, but I got to cover it from 4 different angles, or you're going to be mad later.
Right, exactly. No, you're 100% right, and there are some of the, again, we can go so quickly to shooting and editing right now. You can do it all on the phone. I've got iMovie on my phone. I could shoot and cut something and send it to you, and okay, great. But there are some disciplines of filmmaking and what I call filmmaking, and post-production. Some disciplines in like, let the camera roll 2 seconds before you start and stop the action, or let's cover that scene the way, let's get some over the shoulders, we'll get some close-ups. And so I think there is some of that discipline that gets lost in the immediacy of the act, because again, these days you can shoot and cut and have it posted and the whole world can see it in a matter of minutes, and if you just look at current social events, how cell phone cameras get, you know, it's almost instantaneous. So yeah, I do agree with that. I think there still is a place for the basic tenets of production and post-production. Some of the basic things, you know, time code still matters in some instances, right? If you're shooting multiple cameras and stuff, time code matters. It's a good thing. You know, it's not like, what are these numbers that keep running here? No, that's, you know, that's a numerical address for every frame in the video. So it still matters. So I think you're right. I think and I don't know if I blame it on democratization as much, and it's part of the same thing, but it's the ability to do it so fast and be so immediate and get it out there. And it's almost like a rush to get it out fast.
Yeah.
You know, I just finished a documentary on Judge Robert Marriage, a circuit court judge, 4 years to do that hour and 6 minutes. And the director is an old school filmmaker, a friend of mine, and he's been in the film business for a long time. And he was like, this is not done yet. We don't have a deadline. You know, I mean, the investors probably want us to be done, but we're still, massaging this story. And there is some of that as like, take some time, make sure the story's right. But again, the ability to shoot and edit and distribution, so quickly has changed a lot of things.
Yeah, I think the trick might be, it's not exactly the democratization of the technology, it's what you get used to.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're used to doing fast, the moment you need to do considered, the moment you need to stop and be like, wait a minute, did I get coverage? What I've found is some people don't know to do that anymore. And that's, it's a big part of being successful, especially when you want iteration later.
Yep. Oh, absolutely.
Because everybody wants, you don't want just one thing. You want 10 things made out of the thing you shot.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, you're exactly right. You're exactly right there. Is that, you've got to take some time. And on the other side of things too, agencies, are now being pushed to be faster.
Yeah.
So, I cut something last January that was shot on all iPhone 11s, the whole thing, all iPhone 11s. We did it all remotely. But, so we had the commercials that were going to run on like Outdoor Life Network or something like that. But boy, the social stuff had to go now. The social stuff had to go now. So they didn't shoot it properly. So we had to reformat it in post and do a little pan and scan and everything's like that. But, in some ways, this immediacy, brands have kind of hooked into that and said, get that story out now. I want that, who was it, Oreo's moment or something like that from a couple of years ago. I want that Twitter feed to be right there now, So I imagine from your end of the industry too, you've got clients saying, let's get this, but you got to be careful. You got to be that healthy skeptic, going back to that.
Yeah, and I think it's part of preparation in that even when clients want the immediacy and they want the social content, usually there's another piece that they're going to use it for. So the better the production plan going in, the more you can have the immediacy of the content that needs to be that way. And then you can also have the more carefully crafted stuff done after. So it's all, we like planning. We enjoy it. So you've done so much work. Like I know some of the clients you've worked for, but do you have any campaigns or a campaign that really stands out to you that you're really proud of? I
have a commercial that is, to this day, is my favorite thing I've done. Now, this documentary I just finished, if that was the last thing I edited, and it wasn't because I'm still editing, I'd have been very happy with that. It came out good. It's an important message and this, that, and the other thing. But there was one spot, and I didn't get paid a dime for it as a PSA, and that's, art and commerce,
Right.
But the client was in LA, and it was on, identifying bias by the way a person looks or something. It was a couple of years after 9/11. The client had gone out to LA and had a cut done there, and they just really didn't like it. They said, this is not what we thought and everything like that. So they showed me the spot, and they said, we're just going to give you the footage. I said, can I have storyboards? I said, no storyboards. Make a story. So I worked, this is while we were at Gray Box, and I worked with Rainmaker on sound design for this. And we made this crazy video a really sad video. Instead of the main character, instead of looking at him like a crazy racist, we made him seem very sad, a real sad person. It's almost like you felt sorry for him because, and then the sound design that Rainmaker did was just so open and so beautiful. And client was back out in LA. We sent him the VHS tape probably, and it was one of the best things a client has said to me. They were blown away, and they said, we never knew that story was in that film. We never knew that story existed. And, you know, to this day, you know, again, any edit I look at, I say, boy, I ought to change that, or wish I had, you know, but to this day, I can go back to that spot and say, yeah, that client, that was good, and it felt good. Never made a dime on it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You know, when a client says, wow, we never knew that story was actually in the film we shot, that was my favorite. That was a good thing.
That's great. Like, that is such a great feeling when, I think that's one of the reasons we do this is, you know, telling stories for people, especially when it's important, you know, and we've worked with a lot of companies that are, you know, in healthcare or nonprofits. And when you get to tell a story that matters, or the company's mission matters, it's so much easier for the shooters and the editors and everyone involved to be involved and care. And I think one of the things you kind of touched on there is there can be so many different ways to cut a story. And I've always been fascinated by this, and I've watched you edit a lot. And, you know, I think, and something I tell our editors is, you know, when there is time, you can take a story and you can put the beginning first and the what you thought was the conclusion in the middle. You can do so many things to tell a different story, and being able to sometimes have that time is where the magic can be.
Yep. And yeah, you're exactly right. And I think the beauty of the technology we use now allows us to do that very quickly. Again, I've cut on pretty much all the systems, and, you know, it really hasn't, the technology hasn't really shortened the edit process. You know, you still need 3 days, whatever the days may say, but allows us to experiment more. It really does. So instead of in the old linear days, like, oh God, we'll dub this off and make another version, or I'll go back and rebuild it. Now, I usually have 3 or 4 versions for the client before they see it. And maybe sometimes, like you said, I will put the ending at the beginning and then build the story up to that point. So people the ending may not make sense when they see it at the head. Of course it doesn't. But then we build the story up to that point. Then they're like, oh, that's why that happened. That's why that happened. And you do get that. And I teach my students that too. I said, sometimes you want to take a story and flip it on its ass. You know, let people understand what happened at the end, and let's figure out how these characters got to that point. And that's a fun way of doing things. It's just, you know, and it's a learned skill for the students a lot of times, because they're very linear sometimes in their thinking. And, you know, and I try to get these guys to be, let's make this less linear. Let's jump around. Let's make it interesting. And there is a rhythm to storytelling. You know, I always, equate storytelling and editing to playing music, you know, playing like the guitar over my shoulder. You know, in music, and I'm sure in theater too, there is a rhythm where things work in properly. You don't have to be a musician, but that rhythm is natural to everyone. So like when you're playing music, you may hit the right note at the wrong time and it doesn't feel good. Or you hit the right time and the wrong note, it doesn't feel good. I'm sure in acting, it's the wrong inflection and the right line or something like that, or the wrong look type thing. And I try to tell them, it's like, just let that, you'll feel it. You'll feel that rhythm. And once you get that, then, you know, that's when you see editors going, wait a minute, I'm going to knock it back 2 frames. Nope, make it 3. And they're feeling that rhythm on the cut. And that's a fun thing to get into.
Yeah, a lot of great editors are really good musicians, and they're always, visual storytellers, I find, are always great listeners. Because part of playing music, to be a good musician, is to listen. You have to hear what the other people are doing. You have to listen to your material. And you're right, whether it's theater, filmmaking, there's a rhythm to every story. And even when I'm directing theater, directing a play or whatever it is, or directing a production video, so a lot of times when I'm getting to the final scene, I'll actually tap out a rhythm, because I'm a musician too. I'll tap out a rhythm for pace, because people can have their motivation. They can know what they're supposed to do as an actor. They can do a lot of different things. You can have the scene just right, but the pace is off.
Yep, exactly.
So,
Exactly.
and I think human beings, pace and rhythm affects you emotionally. So I think it's really important. So let me ask you one more question about kind of clients and people on the marketing and even agency side. I interact with all sorts of different people, whether they're agency people or they're clients or they're non-marketers, that run companies. What do people that are on the marketing side or the business side, what do you wish they knew about visual storytelling?
Well, the low-hanging fruit is it takes time and it costs money. Even with the cell phone type thing. I mean, the best clients I've had have, and again, this is through experience and, having done this for 35 years, as you so evilly mentioned in the beginning. Trust, and I know your clients your clients tend to trust you that, okay, Scott's taken this somewhere. I'm not sure this is exactly where I thought it was going to go, but let's sit back and watch the process. And when you get to that level with a client of, just give me some time here. I got an idea. Let me, go get a cup of coffee. But when you come back, I'll have it basically roughed out. That is, a good thing. It's like you're hiring your crew as professionals. This is what they do. So let me do that. If I'm wrong, you can tell me I'm wrong, and I'm totally fine with that. But you've hired me not just to push the buttons, right? If you want to hire my right hand on the mouse, I'll put a separate rate for that. But you've hired Steve Gilman, you've hired our friend Woody Sherman, you've hired whoever it is to help you tell this story. So trust me, I'm on your side.
Yeah, I want this to turn out good for you. I think it's one of the interesting things, and it's an education thing sometimes. And I found that I'll spend a little time explaining to clients because they actually don't know. If you're an MBA, or even sometimes if you're a CMO, you actually haven't spent time learning and training about how to tell a story, the tools. So like simple story structure is something a lot of people don't know. All that stuff. So do you run into some of that with students and in your editorial?
Oh, students all the time because they're just learning.
Right.
Again, like I said before, students want to do the cool execution. They want the floating elephant and they want the jet flyover, and so we really need to again understand what concept and then story development, character development too.
Right.
Strategically, when you're looking at a story and you want to tell a story, who's the character? It's just not a guy named Scott. What's his background? Why is he here? How did he end up right here, sitting here with you? What's his deal? Once you get to know that character, and I'm sure in your acting career and then as directing as well, you need to know the character you're playing.
Yeah.
You need to understand who that person is, and what motivates that person and how they will react to certain things. So for the students, yeah, it is. It has to happen. Clients usually are a little ahead of the game in the. They understand that in the ad world. And when I was doing a lot of corporate video, and I still do, corporate. We call it corporate theater or corporate video at Henniger. They may be taking a little more on the learning curve, but I think you're seeing more and more. If you call it, I don't even want to call it non-creative because everyone's creative, but if you take that MBA, I think they're starting to get introduced to creativity and storytelling earlier in their process. I know the VC School of Business, the tagline for them is creativity at work. So they are, they are absolutely pushing, they have an artist in residence and, and all this stuff because creativity and storytelling, especially these days, you've got to understand how to tell a story and get control of the story that you're telling.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think what I've noticed as the years have gone on and lately is people in all aspects of business are starting to value storytelling a lot more than they used to, because it's all storytelling.
Yep.
Whether you're trying to convince your employees about something that they need to do, or whether you're putting a message out externally, or you're training someone, or you're trying to get a client to understand why the edit could work a different way,
Right.
you're going to use story to try to get your point across.
Yep. You're exactly right. Uh, and these days, the ability to control the narrative, is a little bit tougher because of, it can blow at any seam.
Right. Yeah, it really can it?
So I think the more that people, if you use the term on the client side, understand storytelling and understand, like you said, everything is storytelling. God, I've done tons of them. The corporate training videos is storytelling. We're solving a problem and using a story to identify the problem and show the solution. That may be, how to use the new healthcare interface on the web. Still a story. It's still a story. You need to tell that story and make it understandable and have it solve a problem. So yeah, I think you're exactly right. And you start reading, some of the business magazines, and you read Harvard Business Review or anything like that. There's so much of that in there. There's so much, coming, and I think it's great. And again, that's a whole nother market that the younger folks coming in now can get into, because the New York Times has great visual stories. They got like a mini doc segment, and all these companies and that branded content, and and all this stuff is just pretty amazing. And in some ways, I'm kind of jealous of the folks coming in right now, because it's wide open, but it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I love it, because we're doing things these days that are different and the same than what we've always done. And branded content and the iteration and telling micro stories and all the different things we do right now it's so much fun. I'm having more fun now than I did 10 years ago because of the advent of branded content.
Yeah, and the beautiful thing about that is, going back to what we talked about in the beginning, is you're out of that 30-second box. Right. So the example I show my students is the Virginia Tourism Corporation did a series of spots a couple of years ago. And it was, they were pretty normal commercials, check the boxes. It was like, we got barbecue, we got, breweries, we got a river, we got mountains, we got, a water park, whatever. But then, and these stories are about families at these places, and they're eating barbecue and on the river and at a water park and all that stuff. But then they had a call to action at the end. Say, for more of this story, go here. So you went to the web and saw this expanded story. It's like, wait a minute, this is not just about this family eating barbecue. One was an interracial couple introducing their parents for the very first time. And another one was about a father and son. The father was gay and he was estranged from his father for a decade, and about them getting together. So these 4-minute pieces that, sure enough, had barbecue, had oysters, had good wine, but the story was so different. So Virginia wasn't, Virginia was not a place to go eat barbecue and go to a brewery and go on a river. It was a place where families got together. Oh, by the way, you can get barbecue breweries. It was brilliant, beautiful. I thought it was really a great way, and I show those spots every year to my students. Say, this is where you can go. The 30-second spot does what it does, and we have to do that well for the client. But then you can expand that story where people can really become intimate with your brand, and it was great. It was really cool.
Yeah, and I think what I love about stuff like that, and I actually saw those and absolutely love them, is that along with it all being storytelling, just the art of using empathy and knowing that this is a human endeavor, and some clients, it's like, look, I want to grow my business, I want my product to sell. Well, then we better use empathy and know that we're talking to human beings.
Right. And that when you're talking to a client about that, the CFO or the financial group, they're going to say, where's the spike in the chicken sales or whatever it is, and the education, we talked about the education of the client, that storytelling is not a price item thing.
Yeah.
When you talk about empathy, you're not going to see, it's not a 12-piece chicken bucket now, for now $6 for the weekend, and you're not going to see that spike in chicken. But over the long term, You're getting brand advocates. You're getting people who believe in your brand. For Virginia tourism, tourism folks told me, Rita McClenny told me, he said, this wasn't very popular in some parts of the state. These two stories.
Sure, I imagine.
But they did it, and I think that to me that's it was a great thing. So I think part of the education process you talked about in storytelling is also letting the client know that we are building something here.
Yeah.
We're not doing the 12-piece chicken bucket thing or whatever it is. You want to get to the point of telling a great story and then say, oh, by the way, chicken's on sale this weekend for 12 pieces for $6 or whatever Kentucky Fried Chicken will do. So there's a lot of, when you're building something, the marketing team may get it, but the CFO may say, I don't see a return on this. Where's my return?
A lot of times it doesn't happen right away because it is a long tail process. Because, content marketing and brand marketing are relationship building.
Correct.
So, if you're going to like our company or you're going to like company X, it's because you have a relationship with them and you connect with them emotionally. They connect with your values emotionally so that when they do something that maybe you don't like, you'll give them a break or you'll think of them first. Correct. And relationship doesn't happen overnight. It's not transactional.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's just a great point. And, it takes time. If you want a short spike in sales, sure, put it on sale. But if you start competing there, then everyone else in your areas can say, I'll just go 3 cents lower. And then, what are you going to do?
It's a race to the bottom.
Race to the bottom, right. But if you can, again, getting back to Purell, if you can say, we're an education company because we're keeping your kid in school so he doesn't get germs or anything like that. We care about your kid's education. Then you put the bar somewhere different. And then all the knockoffs say, well, we're 20 cents cheaper. It's like, who cares?
Yeah, but I trust this one.
Yeah, I trust them for my kid's education, and you get to that point. And again, that, like you said, it's a long tail thing, but then you get real brand advocates and folks who are just going to, follow the brand. I mean, and the price may not be that big of an issue.
Yeah. And it works when you're talking about product with like Purell, and it works when you're talking about more complex things like healthcare.
Yeah, exactly.
We've done a lot of healthcare over the years and worked with Centera and Centera RMH here we worked with for years and years until they merged with Centera. But we built a lot of brand equity and therefore a lot of business by storytelling, and not doing it once, not using the 30-second spot, but using like iterative storytelling over and over again. And I think consistency is so important in that.
Yeah, I mean, and quite honestly, you start to get people who know the doctors who have never met the doctors before.
Right.
And you start to get, people who know what proton therapy is. I'm just pulling that, but, and why it's a good thing, and I know that doctor uses that technology, and this kind of remote relationship you start gathering. And yeah, I mean, it's in any industry, it's just not in making commercials. It's anywhere. It really is. You can't do without it.
It's universal, and that's, I think, the power of story. And my favorite thing, I think my favorite things we ever did was with RMH, and, RMH being a community hospital in the Shenandoah Valley, everyone had the perception that like, UVA is clearly better, but RMH was starting a really state-of-the-art heart program, and people were skeptical. And then what started to happen is rescue squads on between UVA and RMH would fly people to RMH because they knew they would get, the rescue squad cares about you getting care the fastest. So from the moment they were picked up to the moment they were receiving care was going to be the fastest. They'd bring them there. So we told the story about helicopters coming in to RMH, not leaving.
Oh, okay. That's good.
And that story and then you would hear in focus groups and people saying like, I hear those helicopters and they're all coming here now.
See, that's brilliant.
And, and their heart program grew and grew and grew. And we just told that story over and over again in as many different personal human ways we could.
Yeah. And the beauty of it's true.
Yeah, it is true.
Yeah. So for the client, it's like, we're just telling true stories that you guys just have.
And that's what I think is my favorite part of what we do for a living. you and us here at Gravity is we love transparency and we love telling true stories. I'm such an enemy of spin and trying to sell. Like, I just want to find the nugget, the truth, and then shine a light on it, because that's what works.
Because these days you can't pull the wool over too many people's eyes anymore. I know from day, like for me and when I teach, those kids are Googling me immediately. As soon as they see my name as their professor, I was like, who this guy is? Is he a bullshitter or what? I'm like, Google away, because if you try to, pull a fast one, just be tricky, try to be tricky, you're going to get called out these days, especially. You've got to understand that people are they're going to be checking up on you, what you claim, what you do. The people are going to check. You might as well accept that. It's gone are the days where you throw something out there in the air and it's like, it's like the used car guy. Those days are gone. They're going to check on you.
They are, and I think that's a really powerful message for brands and storytellers, is that don't even go there. Don't even think that way anymore. The more you can be yourself as a brand, just be who you really are. Be okay with your faults. Be okay with what you're struggling with, and tell your story of how you're trying to get better.
Yeah, exactly. And what you said something about be okay with your faults is everybody makes a mistake. Even a brand will make that mistake. Own up to it. Say, okay, we screwed up. We didn't mean to. We didn't think that this would affect. The one most recently was the Burger King one on trying to put women back in the kitchen or something like that. And I think we had a little back and forth. But I say, that was one of my Healthy Skeptic moments. Like, how did that ever happen? So that happened. It happened, and but instead of just owning up for it, the CEO or whoever tried to defend it and try to spin it in a way. See, we did mean a good thing. It's like, instead of just saying, we screwed up. We didn't realize that message would be taken, and probably the day we put it out there with International Women's Month and everything, it wasn't a good idea.
Yeah. Which would have been the perfect thing to say instead of getting defensive. And I think that's what human beings and people who, love your brand or like your brand or your business, they're forgiving if you're honest.
Yeah, exactly.
But if you try to BS them or you try to get defensive about something, that's it, you're done.
There's the term in politics, of taking the leg out of a story, taking the legs out of the story. It's like if you try to be defensive and be what the Burger King guy was. And I go back to another brand that I give for my strategy students. I give them Victoria's Secret, because that brand several years ago with that CEO, my God, it's just like, just stop talking.
It did not go well.
Just stop talking.
Somebody please take the microphone away.
Yeah. So if they would have just taken the legs right out of the story, people would have still got Whoppers and everything like that. But instead, they were defensive, and then usually the apology comes out after the defensive part, and that doesn't usually go well, because now you look like you're settling. Okay, I'll apologize.
Yeah. It's so funny how many lessons that you can take and use as a human being, you can translate directly to brands.
Oh yeah.
So I could talk to you literally all day. This is so much fun, but I know we're at about an hour, so I've already kept you longer. So I'm going to ask you one final question today, and it's a question I like to ask every guest: is what would the experienced, seasoned storyteller Scott tell the young storyteller Scott?
Oh, that's a really good one. First of all, I would tell him that there are a lot of creative people on the teams you're going to be working with, and understand and accept the fact that because I tell this to my students, if they make changes or suggest changes to your work, it doesn't mean they don't like the work. It means they're trying to help make it better. So knock that little chip right off your shoulder. So that's a big one, and I see that in student teams all the time. They start banging heads on my idea. It's like, no, let's stop the my idea stuff. it's a team idea. And we're all here trying to make it better. So that is a big one that I recognize, you know, when I first started doing work for agencies, because they'd give me a couple days and and then Steve Gilman would come in and say, that's pretty good, but let's try a different shot. I'm like, Jesus, he's ruining my masterpiece. And then I realized it's better. I'm like, okay, maybe this guy is pretty good at this, you know. So that is certainly the biggest thing that I would do, is understand when you're on a creative team, the team you should be all aligned, making the product better for the client. You know, so knock the chips off everyone's shoulder and work together, you know, and understand that the Steve Gilmans of the world and whoever else you work with have been doing this a long time, and they know the client and know what the client, you know, so let's work together. So that, I would say that's my biggest thing. Second one, probably never draft a quarterback before round 6.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I think I've done that almost every year. I can't, and it's always Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, it is.
It is, always.
But seriously, I mean, it really is understanding that, you know, when you're on a team, it's working together, and then really, and I think I've done this because and being around the younger students is really helpful, is in looking at that new technology, embracing the technology part of it, and then seeing how that may fit in traditional storytelling or new ways of storytelling. So if it is vertical video on, you know, an iPhone 12, because it's vertical doesn't mean it's wrong. You know, it is a different way of doing things, and it is a newer way that, you know, again, I can remember telling students, now if you're going to shoot with this, you shoot horizontal, you know, and now I'm like, okay, no, that probably wasn't good advice. You know, that probably was, you know, this is the way people are seeing videos now. So, you know, so it's just being open to, you know, learning, continual learning, you know, and just not acting like, you know, because I did it this way 20 years ago means we have to do it this way now. You know, you need to kind of, you know, ride with the current a little bit and see where it'll take you, and then use some of that new knowledge in the storytelling skills that you already have.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and that's a great place for us to end today, because that's an amazing point. And I think people in our industry, the ones that are curious and continuous learners, are always the ones that are successful.
Yes, agreed.
You know,
100%.
And listening to each other, I know editing with you, one of the things I learned over the years was, you know, if you're a director, you think you're supposed to be in charge and know what you want. And there are times where you have to turn to the people around you, the editors, and be like, I'm stuck.
Yep.
What do you got? Help me out.
And I think, you know, when you look, and a director is a leader, you know, and I don't want to go into too much longer. The director is a leader, and the best leaders you see are ones who actively ask for input from everyone. It may be, you know, the grip who's sitting there looking at it and say, what did you see? Was that turn quick enough or something like that? And any kind of leadership, you know, who, you know, anybody thinks they've got all the right ideas is wrong in my mind.
That's for sure.
You know, so, you know, there's a story about General Eisenhower who demanded his staff question his decisions, poke holes in them, stress test them. He said, if you don't do that, why are you here? You know, why are you even here? So, you know, it is good to see that kind of leadership. You know, we talk about storytelling is like, you know, like, Steve, what do you think about this cut where I have it? Does it work for you? And we get that thing going.
Yeah, that's the fun in it, and I think that's the art of it too. Is it making a conversation and actually working? Yeah. That's the great thing about creativity. You're in a box together, and you got to figure it out.
Right.
You know?
Exactly.
Well, thanks, man. Thanks so much for doing this today.
You're welcome. This is a lot of fun. Anytime.
Yeah, this was a blast. I swear, like, we could have gone. I could have talked to you for another hour or so.
Anytime. I'd be happy to do it. It's great to see you again too.